Hi, and welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm Wendy Conquest, and I'm here with Tim Stein, Jeannie Vitoni, and Dan Drake. We're clinicians and writers from across the country who've created this experience for you because we ourselves are really interested in the latest and most interesting parts of healthy sexuality as well as addiction. Each time we meet, we'll have a guest to join us on a particular topic, which we also want to know more about. I want to tell you a little bit about the four of us. We've been friends and colleagues for anywhere from 10 to 20 years. We've done different projects together, and we were just so excited to come together as a group. And we're just so excited to be here with you today. Today, our guest is Staci Sprout, who specializes in women's sex addiction. We're going to bring Staci on in a minute, but first I want to check in with my friends here. How are you all doing today?
Great. Yeah? Great. I'm looking forward to having Staci on. I feel like us talking about the female sex addict, it's such a topic that a lot of folks don't talk about. And so I'm so glad that we're having that conversation and then bringing Staci in today.
Yeah, you know, I think that I wonder a lot about if there's such a thing as a pure female sex addict. There's a lot of talk in the field if a female sex addict is actually a love addict in disguise that uses sex to try to gain love. I don't know. What do you think about that?
You know, I don't have a whole lot of experience working with female sex addicts. Most of the work that I've done has been with male sex addicts. The few female sex addicts I've seen it come from both sides, though. I had one female sex addict I worked with who was just absolutely compulsively sexually acting out, and it didn't seem to come from a place of I'm attempting to maintain a relationship or that. She was, driving an hour away to act out anonymously with people in her car. And I've also had the female sex addicts that it really felt much more like a love addiction, and sex was the way to keep the people hooked in and connected. But I'm dying to talk to Staci and hear her perspective on this. And I'm sure there's some nuances that I am missing. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what other people think about all this. Dan, what do you think?
Well, I was just thinking, Wendy, actually backing up for a second. I think it's a fantastic question, but when you're talking about sex addiction versus love addiction, I don't know that everyone's going to know the distinction. How would you define the difference between those?
Well, it's interesting because when I'm working with men sex addicts, what I'm finding a lot here in Boulder, Colorado, is that there's love addiction that's with the sex addiction, and almost the love addiction a lot of times is more prevalent than the sex addiction when we really get down to it, that they will be pursuing different women if it's a heterosexual relationship or heterosexual orientation. And so they'll be pursuing women, but when it gets down to actually having sex, they really don't want to do that. They're really looking for the adoration. They're looking for a sense of being liked or being loved, and not really the being sexual, which I am finding fascinating.
I would honestly, you just made me think, I would love to know too, when Staci comes on, is the difference, how women are sexualized these days post, internet, smartphones, how that changes things, what pornography looks like, and how that's affected sex addiction versus sex and love addiction for women. I know it's affected everybody. And so I'm actually just curious the difference in how women are sexualized and how that might affect your question.
And I'm also hearing about some female sex addicts who are hooked on porn, which in the past was something that was, I hadn't heard a whole lot, but more that compulsive pornography use. And I wonder how much of that is something that I was unaware of in the past, and how much of that is, like you were saying, sort of the internet and sort of the recent evolutions of technology.
That was something I was looking into the other day when I was doing a little research for the interview, is the impact of the internet for both male and female, and how the numbers, this article was proposing that the numbers of female sex addicts, particularly with pornography, was really on the rise. Now, is that because it's being talked about and it's less taboo, right? Or is it happening more often? But certainly the invention of internet and coming into our world and coming into our homes and then coming onto our phones has impacted everyone. And so it would make sense that women would be also, you know, increasing numbers with pornography.
I'm really interested in talking with Staci today because she has written a book, Naked in Public, and it is about her journey, I believe, in, I'll let her speak for herself, but her journey in in identifying her own sex addiction and then her own recovery journey with that. I'm interested in hearing what that was like for her, and just writing the book. You know, I think that was terrifically courageous to write and then publish and then promote. I think it's great because so many women, I think, are struggling with this and they don't know I'm going to say what's wrong with them. They have a feeling that they're being really bad or sinning. And so I just think that her being so candid is going to help so many people.
Let's bring her on.
Love it. Let's do it.
Staci, you there?
Hi.
Yay!
Welcome, Staci.
Hey, Staci.
Hi, Dee.
Welcome,
Hello, Wendy,
welcome.
Tim and Dan. So grateful to be here.
So let's see. So we're so curious about the book you wrote, and you basically declaring your own addiction to sex. And we had a little bit of a talk about, is there a difference between sex addiction and love addiction, especially with women, and does sex addiction cover for love addiction, or is there such a thing as a pure sex addict that's a woman?
Well,
that's a big question.
Yeah, fantastic. You're getting into the heart of what I think many clinicians are curious about and wrestle with. And one thing that comes to mind in my training early on is someone wise taught me that we can look at what the intent is. And I think it is a complicated question and answer, because the intent in terms of when someone, let's say they come into therapy and they're saying, I'm doing this behavior and it's causing me trouble. What is the behavior? Does it involve specifically, I keep looking for sex. I keep looking for cyber sex. I'm looking for hookups. I'm looking for, I'm swiping and constantly and getting myself into situations. So that behavior makes us think of, oh, okay, are they compulsively acting out sexually? And then another question to look at is, well, why are they doing that? And what is the peak? If we look at the cycle, like we learned with Patrick Carnes, of these are the behaviors leading up to it, and then we go back and these are the fantasies leading up to it, and then this is the the thing that they do over and over, the peak sexual experience that they might get addicted to, or is it a relational experience? What is as we get underneath the behavior, what are the fantasies about? What are the intentions? And so you can actually see the behavior looking kind of similar, but when you drill down into the fantasies and into what the person is seeming to be looking for, they can be very different. And so to me, that's a good way of trying to separate out, is the intention kind of the looking for love and using sex to get it? Is the intention looking for that sexual experience, which sometimes I've heard people talk about looking for power, and oftentimes looking for power over or domination. But it may be sexual affirmation. I'm sexy. So when I think of another layer of that question, though, I think, is it possible that there are women out there that aren't really looking for love? They really want just sex. And that to me is a more complicated answer. And I would go into my own story, because when I wrote my book, and I love my book, I'm gonna hold it up.
Yay!
This was such a labor of love, and I am really proud of it. And I part of the inspiration to write it was because I was actually, and there's a million inspirations, but I had people say, well, women don't recover from this. A, women don't have sex addiction, and B, women don't recover from it. You know, they really don't recover. I mean, men can get better, but and the stigma and all that. And so I'm like, no, women can recover from sex addiction. And so the piece of, you know, when I wrote that book, I really was focused on what was happening for me. It really was the sexual acting out, the seeking for power. And yet underneath that, there was a profound loss of love. And as our friend Kelly McDaniel and colleague would call it, mother hunger, like the hunger for nurture, the absolute hunger for nurture and structure and someone to be there to care for me and protect me. That was such an unmet need from childhood. So if someone might have looked at just my behaviors, they would say sex addict. She fantasizes about sex. She's compulsive about sexual behavior. She's putting herself in risky situations. What she's saying is she really wants sex and power. But what was also paired with that is what I think of as on the continuum of love addiction, what I now call love restriction. So I had sexual addiction and love restriction. I had an aversion to intimacy type behaviors, kind tone of voice, someone wanting to be closer, someone who wanted to cuddle with me. All of those things actually evoked contempt because of my wounding. And so to call me a love addict would have seemed really strange the way that I was wired. And yet there was a profound unmet need. And so because of my attachment style, I was really adverse to love-based behaviors because it actually triggered a deeper fear that I was going to get hurt and that vulnerability that I just could not tolerate. So one layer of my recovery was just safety. Like, what is this woman doing? How can we get her safe? Another layer was starting to look at and even own that it's possible to want love or, you know, attachment bonding type things without appearing weak. And, you know, so in a way, although in this book, I did write about a relationship, and it was that relationship that got me into sexual recovery. So you could say it was a love of a man that inspired me to get into recovery, first from codependency and then from sexual addiction. That relationship didn't last. And because I think we both had some pretty profound intimacy restrictions going on, we found each other and couldn't translate, you know, the movement into more vulnerability. So I'm really curious about your thoughts about all this. And I've kind of laid out a lot of different things with it, but I feel like it all goes together. And yet at times we have to pick it out in layers and kind of work on it in sections.
Staci, I just want to say I was so struck by what you just said. I mean, I have your book and it's already, you can see it torn, like it's dog-eared. To me, that's a sign of a book that I've read. You know, it's not really, I'm not very delicate with books. There's like underlined stuff. My wife, it drives my wife crazy because she likes it all like kind of nice, and I just kind of destroy books. But I read through it, and I was really struck by, you know, you just talked about kind of protecting this vulnerability that you had, and yet you write a book called Naked in Public where you're vulnerable and you share your experience. I just was blown away by how courageous you were, how eloquent you were, and how you wrote. I just want to say it was really, really personally really touching for me to be able to read and have you share your story out there. And I thought it humanized the issue very well. It shared your story, and also I think it gave a lot of hope for this. So I'm just on a personal level, I'm really curious, you know, you've done obviously a lot of work to be able to put this out there. How was it for you to write this memoir and publish it? That must have, to share this vulnerably to the world was a real big gift. I'm just curious how you did it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what you shared about the book and the dog-eared pages. And it means so much to me because when it was first published, we thought, well, this might help a few women, you know, and even just the idea that men would read it or be interested in it is just so affirming to the story, you know, because we're all impacted by members of all genders and what they're doing. And so for me, it's funny, I'm like tearing. Just means a lot to me. It's one thing to have a vision and hope, but writing a book, as many, is a solitary experience. Even if you're writing with someone else, you have to work on your sections alone. And so I absolutely 100% felt a spiritual call to write that book. I mean, it was about trying to be of service and educate, but it was also about my purpose on the planet. And I didn't really understand that. But one thing I've come to know, and I use this all the time in my clinical work, maybe especially with women, but men too, people of all genders, is why are you here? What is your life purpose? And I actually use a 5-circle model, which includes life purpose in there as part of sobriety, because I personally tried to get sober for 3 years from my bottom line sexual behaviors. And I could not stop, even though I was going to 12-step and going to therapy and trying. And it wasn't until I actually started focusing on my life purpose that I found a reason to work so hard. And it was such hard work to get and stay sober. And it was spiritual work. And I had a lot of aversions to kind of the idea of there being a beneficent force in the world because of my own wounding and bitterness about that. And so, but that call kind of spurred me on. And I had a car accident and I got a settlement. And so I made a plan to go to Hawaii. And I was on the beach in Hawaii, and I was trying to write. And so much grief came over me that I had to stop for, I don't know, maybe a year or two. And then I fell in love. So it was in that loving relationship that that kind of whispering idea, writing the book, started to come back. And I started to feel safe enough because I was loved and supported and loving and supporting. And I had that kind of experience of like direct love, spiritual love. I mean, there's indirect love. I'm one with the universe and I love all that. And I needed someone to hold me and someone to hold and to say, this is really hard, but you're going to be okay. And so it wasn't the kind of dependent love that, someone to rescue me. It was actually a beautiful partnership. And in that process, I became kind of safe enough and the strength came through me to be able to write the story. And I would say there's kind of 3 things to say about it. One is that in writing of the story, it brought up a lot of pain. So one thing I am good at, and I'm really grateful for this, is what I call resourcing. And I know that you are too, or you wouldn't be here, in this group of 4, like having this inquiries, like you can connect with others. And although I always struggled to connect in a love or sexual relationship, I could connect in networks. And so I surrounded myself with support and 12-step report and support groups. And I joined a writer's group and I had a lot of support when I was writing it. And so that helped me to be more vulnerable as I wrote the book. And then the next layer was I wrote a book that I never would publish. So there was so much stuff that came out in the writing process that didn't end up appropriate for the final product. And actually, most of it was about the sexual victimization and abuse that had happened to me. Because I realized that is maybe another book someday or another story. But this was a story about a girl who grows up to use her sexuality to have power over others and to get herself in a lot of very painful and difficult situations, and to somehow kind of miraculously stumble into this world of recovery and to enter into rooms of mostly men and to heal and to finally find good therapy, recognize what trauma was, and then to really start taking off and having a life. And, the middle and second half of the book is all about recovery and the hard journey. But, that's where I want to focus the energy on, really. The last piece I'll say is that the editing process, oh my gosh. So, I mean, I wrote the book that I wouldn't publish and took out so much stuff. And then there was what was left. And then my editor, who was this beautiful, amazing woman. And so she would send me stuff and she would just circle stuff and she'd say, simplify. Because what I do when I don't want to feel my feelings is I make things really complicated. So I had these beautiful, artistic, wordy line, and she'd be like, meh. And so I would take out all this stuff and just say something really directly. And then I would just weep because it was the direct telling of the story. It was like, oh, this is so sad that this happened to her, you know, and of course it was me, but it's all of us in a way, right? I mean, you all could write memoirs about your journeys, and you would have things that, you know, people would read and just weep, because it's like, that is so sad. And it's so hard to be with that directly. And so that writing process really, because of, she kept giving that, it was almost like it was like therapy in this really different way. So it was an amazing process. I'm so grateful I got to do it. And I felt just really held up by so many people around me during the whole process.
You know, when you talk about that whole process, Staci, what I hear, I put it in terms of recovery for myself. And I hear, you know, intimacy with yourself and intimacy with others, but I also hear trust. Like I know in my own story, there have been so many times that I would just try to make things happen the way that I wanted to. You know, my addict brain would say, this is the way it's supposed to be, and I'm just going to force it to be that way. And it never worked out well. And, you know, I look later on at many of the things that I've done myself or with other people, this podcast being one of them, where it wasn't my vision. It wasn't something that I thought, this is something that I need to do, but it was more trusting that, hey, I'm being called for this for some reason, that there's a path being opened up in front of me, and I don't know where it's going to take me and what it's going to look like, but I'm just trusting that it's taking me where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to offer to the world around me. And those things have always paid dividends for me personally, but also to my soul. Mm-hmm. And when I hear you talk about the evolution and the writing and the development of your book, I hear a trust, and I hear allowing something else to guide you in what you were supposed to put out there to the world around you. I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes.
Mm-hmm. One thing about your book and letting it be known, this story be known in such a vulnerable way, again, sort of shines the light of opportunity for others who might be searching and breaking through that shame and reading the book and saying, me too. And so then I think about who comes actually into our rooms. And we don't have a lot of female sex addicts or sex and love addicts who come into our rooms. And I'm kind of wondering, sort of in a larger philosophical way, you know, what is the clinical world not paying attention to, or what could we do better to bring more awareness or to bring those clients in to offer more services? I'm kind of like that advocacy piece, you know, how can we do a better job of that to serve these ladies? Any suggestions on that?
Well, if I could only give one answer, it would be to invite them into the question of intimacy. And it sort of contradicts what I said earlier about myself, where I saw, you know, vulnerability as a weakness. Mm-hmm. There is a time when women just won't come in. They just won't come in. Mm-hmm. Or they'll come one time and they won't come back. And I see that a lot. And when I work with clinicians and consult, they say, well, what am I doing wrong? Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily time for them to come in all the way or come in long term yet. So we have to remember that we can plant seeds. And I think that we're all doing that. We're doing that today. I'm sure you do it in your practice. And so, but I started trying to work with women in 2006 as a specialist. And all the clinicians in my local area said, oh, good. Let's refer all our women to Staci because we don't know what to do with them. And we, you know, it's a tough population. These are tough cookies. They have survived. And one of my colleagues said this beautiful thing about, you know, that I really related to is the thing inside me is so much worse than anything you could do to me. You know, I'm not going to risk it. Mm. And so I think that knowing that they may come and go, and that we are holding a container and kind of trying to invite over time the world to be waking up to what's really happened for women. I just think we're a little ahead of the curve here in a way. Now, I did start getting consultation calls from clinicians after they read my book who said, what do I do with women? And so I started a consultation group, and then I was saying the same things over and over about what I do. And I realized, you know what, I should create a training. And so I did create an online training program called Shadows of the Heart. And I put everything in there that I could, and it's anyone can sign up. It's for helping professionals, and you know, it's on my website. And so I do have some things I feel are best practices that really look at this model of empowerment, visions and life purpose, to try to bring the positivity and decrease the shame right off the bat. Really take a deeper look at the container of connection and empathy, and how even sharing some of our own story is so disarming to this population. And it's so scary as clinicians. Can I really share some of my shame? And yet sometimes that's the only way to break through. Looking at how women can work with their rage, their eroticized rage, the resentment, which can be so scary to invite into the room. Of course, looking at fears and shame. So I think there are some clinical things I have found to be different about this population that I'm trying to support. But not everyone will take my classes, and you know, people have other great things to offer. And so that piece, I started interviewing like every woman I talked to, because I was trying to get them all into groups, and none of them wanted to get into groups. Because other women can be so scary for female sex addicts, and even female love addicts. There's so much betrayal that has happened for them. And so they didn't want to go into groups. And so I said, well, what's the one thing you would really want to join a group for? And that was the word, was intimacy. Like they wanted to feel closer with people. Even the ones who might have said, no, I don't. Eventually they get to the place where they start to recognize their loneliness, or they fall for someone unexpectedly and it changes them. So I think that, you know, I coach people to revise your website, like really, you know, just talk about reaching out to women for intimacy, relationships, sexuality issues, you know, and being prepared to look at the issue of pornography as well, because we're seeing that so much more in the younger women population.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. Oh, we're going to redo our website, and here's some more ideas of ways to do that, to equally represent both genders in the addiction population, and changing the wording so that it matches more of their experience. Because I'm sure our language is more towards male addicts. So,
well, yeah. And that's, I mean, we've all done it. Mine too. You know, I mean, on my website, I was saying, am I a sex addict? There's nothing in there about intimacy or relationship addiction or anything. And it's like, oh, I need to get in there and, you know, keep working with that. And also, you know, putting up pictures of women's faces that are happy, like instead of like, do you want treatment for sex addiction? You know, here's the pictures, like, it's like, no, we want to see the vision of where we're going toward, you know.
That's a really good point, Staci. I hadn't really thought of that, but I think a lot of when I reflect on it, a lot of websites have women with downcast faces, you know, their hands are covering their eyes. I mean, that's a pretty typical picture that you see. I'm thinking of my website. I probably have a bunch of those up there too.
I hear you. It's just part of the process of realizing the importance of the visions and who we want to be versus maybe where we are. So we think, oh, this is where we are, so I want them to resonate. But just what I found is that the women, by the time they're reaching out, they're reaching out for something different than where they are. Yeah.
So Staci, this you called it love restriction, and you referred to attachment style. And I don't know if the people that are listening actually understand about attachment style in this piece, how love restriction can occur. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So in some of the research on attachment, so what is attachment? Like, how do I lean toward you in some way? I call you, I reach out, I want to talk, I pursue you to connect. How do I back up? You know, how do I move further away? In my class, so I teach a class called Intimacy Boot Camps. So I took my own advice, I focused on intimacy, and I boiled everything down to 8 weeks of what women need to know. And I made it into a class because it's a little less threatening than a therapy group. And so in the class, I talk about everybody needs certain skills just to get by in the world. And you need to know how to level up a relationship, and you need to know how to level down a relationship. And you need to be intentional about that, so you can create your intentional community around you. And you need to distance from people who are not safe. So it's all based on polyvagal and safety. And so what I found coming into my recovery is looking back at myself. I didn't know how to level up or level down. I wasn't conscious about any of it. I was just acting out my childhood. And the attachments that I had with my mom were so painful because, and I love my mom, and you know, this is the qualification that maybe my child guilt has to put in there, but the truth is she is an amazing woman. She did pass this last year, she was incredibly wounded, and she hurt me profoundly. And so as a child, I had this absolute, you know, conflicted bond with her where I wanted to attach, but I kept getting abused. And so eventually the abuse was so damaging to me that I stopped trying to attach. And that's what we call an avoidant, primarily avoidant type attachment, right? You primarily avoid, which is really a feat for a child because we are wired to connect, but it was just that bad. And so there's the attachment style where you try to connect and then it's not always good, but you try again and it's kind of the anxious and you keep trying. And then there's the one where you just quit trying. And I connect that to the polyvagal, kind of the fight or flight. You're going back and forth. You have a mobilized attachment style or you have an immobile attachment style. You are frozen. You do not try. And that's where I think we see some of the more classic sex addiction is the immobilized attachment. They're frozen around that. But at least they got to have that, you know, that kind of brainstem kind of drive for something. And that's connection for them. So what I mean by restriction, so I came to that terminology and I hadn't heard it before, but it's really important to my work, is that there's something inside us that gets rewired based on the wounds. And then we pick it up ourselves. So for me, I had a restriction around closeness. I would shrink back. There was some way that so you call it avoidant attachment style, but I developed this compulsive restriction so that someone would come into my orbit and be like loving and present, want to be my friend. And I'd be like, ugh, you know, get away. Like, it's too dangerous. It's going to melt my iceberg. It's going to unthaw me. And I'm going to just flood, right? There's the flooding. There's the overwhelming emotion that I cannot afford to have unfrozen. So I have to be really careful who I let close. And I'll just do it in this controlled and maybe just focus on the sexual way. So I feel like I've lost the thread of your question because I've been talking, but can you remind me where I'm supposed to be?
Oh, no, everything you're saying is just perfect. So let me just reflect that. With every addict that I've ever worked with, there has been a time in their lives where, and it could be, I'm curious. So I found it could be in utero, it could be at birth, or any time after that, usually childhood, but adolescence, where they are betrayed emotionally in some way by a caretaker. And it could be a one-time event, it could be a repeated event, but at that moment they say, that's it. I don't need you. I'll do it on my own. That's it. And I believe in that moment is where then the addiction comes in, because then to get connection, it's this desire for connection, but from something other than a true intimate relationship.
You know, and in my experience, and I think it's always interesting because I love what you're saying, Wendy, about that attachment rupture and that sort of being the starting point for where the addictive process begins. But I've also found that oftentimes the parents, it's not their intention whatsoever, and they're just doing the best job they can. They're just so wounded. And then two, that as addicts are often in denial about that. I have so many clients that walk in and it's like, well, tell me about your family growing up. And they say, my family was fabulous. And, you know, I'm jaded these days. So I think, oh, a fantasy to shatter. Got it. But I also remember being that person who said my family was fabulous and my family did the best they could and they loved me. But I also see the emotional wounding that I carried out of that. So there is this intimacy piece, but I also think it's really important to recognize it's not intentional and we may not be aware of it, even though it might very much be present.
I totally hear you, Tim. That's as soon as I ask, so what was your family like? The classic answer is, we were great. Everything was fine. There were no problems with my childhood. And I'm the same. It's like, well, give me 10 minutes. So let me scratch the surface a little bit and then let's see what we've got.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, this is totally different subject, but when I was reading your book and, you know, you're going into recovery, and at the time, you know, you're entering into the men's recovery meetings, and how that must have been very awkward at times for you as a woman, and also maybe for the men in the room. And so I wondered if there were conversations that you had. And I also, because I work with addicts and partners, for partners to hear that there's a woman in the room sometimes really activates their fear and worries. Did any of that kind of conversation come up, or you had to work that out with some people, or decrease fears, or, you know, kind of work out that, making sure everyone feels comfortable? Did you ever have that experience?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that, Jeannie, because that was absolutely a part of my early recovery. I was an unsafe fellow in 12-step. So the partners were very wise to be concerned about me, or a woman who is coming in newly into recovery for sex addiction or love addiction. Not all women are going to betray, but I was at great risk for that. That, in fact, was my compulsion. So you can see where it's just a recipe for challenge. And yet somehow it's amazing that it could work at all. I had men say, when I called them for support, I'm not able to take support calls from you in order to honor my wife. And of course, at the time I felt bruised and rejected. But you know what I came to learn is that that's a strong man who has a strong marriage, and he's taking care of himself, and good for him. And, you know, I've learned to never be offended by people's healthy boundaries. So I think it's really good for partners and, you know, female partners and their male husbands to talk about, is the room safe? Do they need to go to a men's only meeting? Do they need to go to maybe a recovery event where they can meet this woman and the partner can see how she feels around her? You know, there came a time in my recovery where I had learned about the value of honesty, integrity, and to never betray. And it happened after I did my 9th step. And I remember I actually did a public 9th step. Well, it was at a public recovery meeting, and I read it aloud. I wrote about that in my book, of apology to the partners that I had hurt. And after that point, I think it would have been impossible for me to cheat again. I had a spiritual experience, and I just, you know, once you put your hand on the hot stove and you see how much it burns you or me, I could see how much pain I was in from the betrayal I had caused, let alone what I'd caused to others. I never wanted to feel that pain again. I never wanted to inflict that on anyone else. And then later, as I wrote in the book, I was cheated on massively, and I got that experience of empathy. And so that was yet another layer of recovery. It's just like, wow, can't do that stuff and be well. And so it is a good thing to be aware of.
And did you ever have conversations with some of the other fellows in the recovery of both of you establishing boundaries with each other so that you both could be in the meetings and feel comfortable?
What I ended up doing was starting a meeting with a gay man. And that way, everyone who didn't feel comfortable with a woman around didn't come to my new meeting. And a lot of people who didn't mind or weren't triggered by women particularly, or you know, happened to get to know me, they would come to our meeting. So it was a small meeting, but it was very safe, I think, for all of us. And that helped a lot for the first year, where I was really getting more safe. And then after that, you know, I kind of crossed a threshold where, I just was more safe, and it didn't really come up as much. It's almost like people have a sense of, oh, okay, you know, we know her. I'd go to retreats, and so then it got easier. But yeah, new women coming in, it's worth being cautious and careful for sure.
Thank you.
This is a little bit of a different departure too, Staci, but I know I hear this all the time when I do supervision groups. You know, everyone asks for resources for male betrayed partners in heterosexual relationships with women. And I know you've got resources for men, but I don't see too many resources out there for male betrayed partners. So, you know, on the other end of the women as a sex addict, what would you say for the men that might be listening or struggling with betrayal? What resources or suggestions or help would you have for them?
Well, I do have a website where I created to try to collate resources, because I got that question so many times, because if specializing with female sex addicts, of course, I'd meet their husbands and they'd know where to go. And so it's called malepartnersoffemalesexaddicts.com. And I deliberately put that all in the title because I was trying to just state, like, there are men who are partnered with female sex addicts. I didn't want to put sex and love addicts. That was too long anyway, but it's like, this is real. It's happening. The betrayal is devastating. And what's very sad to me is that when I created that website, there was so much more resources in the world for cuckolding, like in kind of the fetish of men who enjoy being cheated on. And there was nothing for the men who didn't enjoy that, or even the permission that you don't have to enjoy that. And you can still be a very strong man. So that's been a wonderful journey of working with men who have contacted me through that site and said, can I get on a phone list? Can I connect with other men? I don't offer a group through that site. I don't have that to give, but I'm hoping that the men who will connect through the site will continue to resource and eventually create their own group. So I can, if you have links to this talk, I can give you a link to that site. You can click on it. But what I will say is it has been one of the most rewarding parts of this journey is I literally got a letter from a man recently who he's been married for many years, a very wise elder who had a recent realization about his wife's sex addiction and no idea. And, so it's so profound what's happening to men, and the secrecy and the shame. And, they're adding more training through ITAP on this. And it's just, I would say to those men, you're just so cutting edge, and it's okay to feel devastated. And you are still a strong, amazing man. And her cheating is her injury, and she's trying to inflict that on you, and it's going to hurt. You don't have to take on that shame. You didn't cause that. You can't control that. You can't even cure that, as we say. And the more you do on your recovery, the better it helps everyone, whether you stay with her or not. But just really affirming their strength and that they don't have to feel shame.
Can you repeat that website really slowly for me?
Oh, sure. It's Male Partners of Female Sex Addicts.com.
And we'll have a link to that so people can find it, because you're the resource I send people to, because I don't know really much else out there for men.
I don't think there is anything designated. There will be, mark our words, right? Yeah. Right now, it's just in its infancy and there's a very wonderful and brave man named Andy Johns who had gone through the APSATS, partner program as a male, and really blazed the trail through there, and were like, you need to change your gender on all your paperwork, and really woke up, a lot of people there. And he contacted me, someone put him in touch with me, and he helped me with the website and with a survey. So we actually have a survey, and we're just starting to get enough answers to give kind of responses. And I just talked with Stephanie Carnes about that the other day as part of an interview, just trying to raise awareness. And I wrote an article, which I haven't published yet, but I need to get it out there. I do, in part of my ethics class in treating female sex and love addiction, I speak with Mari Lee, who really, I think, is a field expert in this area. And she talked a lot about what it's like to work with male partners. And so that's a part of that 5-hour ethics class. If anyone's interested in more depth on this topic, you can at least go there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Can you talk about, so I saw on your website is the She Virtuals Recovery Summit.
Yes. So the She Recovery Summit took place in October of 2020. Absolutely first of its kind. So Crystal Renaud Day she's a minister, a coach, educator, counselor, and she wrote a book called Dirty Girls Come Clean, which was really the first book I ever saw about women and pornography. And it's a compilation of stories. So reading about other women and how they struggled, and it is within the Christian faith. So they have certain kind of spiritual value struggles that people outside that faith don't necessarily have the same struggles with. And it was written in a time where pornography was less widely accepted as it is now, but it's still a fantastic book. And I think everyone should read it. And so Crystal came up, she partnered up with Covenant Eyes, and they made a summit. So it's a series of interviews with experts from around the world, people in recovery, people who are coaches, people who are therapists. I was honored to be interviewed for it, talking about intimacy and women. But it really focuses on pornography and overcoming addiction to pornography. And so it's $49. Anybody can go on, purchase it. You can take, watch the interviews you want, not the rest. And she's creating a whole community. She offers women's groups. It's really one of the best resources on the planet for women, especially dealing with overcoming pornography, and Christian women will especially find a home there. But it's not exclusive. It's open to anyone who can benefit.
That's an excellent resource.
When I first saw it, I thought it would be like an annual conference or something like that, but that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing this was a one-time piece with pulling all these experts together to talk on this particular subject.
Yes, it may be an annual event. I think there was some intention to do some more things in this April. And maybe there'll be something again in the fall. I'm not sure about that, but definitely go to the site and I can give you the link to put up so that people can check out that resource. I'm sure it will expand over time.
Great. Okay. So I think we're maybe about at time. Does the group have any other last questions or comments for Staci?
I think the thing I just want to wrap up with, Staci, is one, it's such a pleasure to talk with you. And two, I'm just struck by your grace and your vulnerability, and how I just think that I can just imagine being in a therapy session room with you, with your grace and your vulnerability and appropriate boundaries, and how safe that must make your clients feel, and how much you bring to the field. So I'm just grateful. So much of what you talk about resonates with me. And I always just assume that I am a mirror of other people. So I make up that it just, excuse me, that it resonates with other people as well. So thank you so much for not just this interview, but everything that you bring to this field.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That dedication over time, because this is not going to be a flash in the pan. This is a movement of bringing this population to the forefront. And so thank you for being one of the people to start that process, and then the dedication to keep up the efforts and spreading the word. So it was so lovely to meet you today, Staci.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Tim and Dan and Wendy. I am so honored to be here and part of the conversation, adding what I have to add. And I want to honor the people who came before me, people who helped to train me and teach me and inspire me, and all those who are coming, now and going through trainings and are going to just teach us so much. And so it is a movement. I love that you called it that. I call it that too, a movement of women stepping into their own vulnerability and the grace that comes just through recovery is what I think of. So authenticity. And so thanks for this lovely time to talk with you. And if you ever want to talk more, maybe about pornography or something else, I'd love to come back someday.
Sounds great.
Staci.
Bye, Staci. Thank you.
Bye.
I so enjoyed having Staci with us today, and I'm wondering what you all thought about the presentation and any things that struck you particularly that we want to talk about.
Something that really stuck with me and stuck out was I was just really amazed at how she talked about vulnerability, her narrative that vulnerability was a weakness. And my experience of her was, wow, I mean, her vulnerability was such a strength. She had such a way of sharing herself with us, sharing, her wisdom, of expressing that. I think it's such a gift for our community. And that was what struck me more than anything.
I think the piece that I'm walking away with was, we have often talked about sex addiction as being an intimacy disorder. But when she was talking about intimacy and the fear of intimacy and the way that it shows up, and love addiction and sex addiction as being ways of coping with that fear of intimacy, it really sort of crystallized that for me and made sense. And I just think that's such an important piece to hold on to, that idea that sex addiction and love addiction are really at their core intimacy disorders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have never met Staci in person. And so being able to put all the words and all the conversations I've heard, into the face, and she has such a gentle, loving presence. I really appreciated that. One thing I came away with was so many resources. She has so many resources. She's been such an advocate, from the male partner website to the intimacy boot camps to being part of the She virtual conference. She's just a wealth of resources. So I'm really curious to go to her website and look at all of those and have better referrals for our clients too.
What was your takeaway, Wendy?
One thing I didn't mention is she's in Seattle, Washington. So I mentioned our locations, I believe, but well, maybe I didn't. So just for the audience, Dan's in Los Angeles, and Tim and Jeannie are in Santa Rosa, California, and then Staci is in Seattle. So so my takeaways: I think she's just a powerhouse. And this whole piece that it's spiritually driven really impacts me a lot. The absence of ego, I think, was so prevalent in everything that she was saying. And so as she was talking, I could relate to so much of what she was saying. And also I have a number of clients who are addicts, women addicts, and the struggle of trying to have them come together in a group. And I did a group with female sex addicts a number of times. And the very first thing I say is, hey, we're all women here. How scary is that? Because women addicts don't trust other women. And so it's this conundrum, I think, of how I'm going to say dangerous it can be for a woman addict to be seeing a male therapist, because I think the tendency to want to seduce is there, and the fear of being vulnerable with both men and women. So then if they're with a woman therapist, that's just as scary. So I think that needs to be named. But Staci was just, I just thoroughly enjoyed talking to her and learning a lot from her.
One thing that also came to me when she talked about, I think she said she does 5 circles. So I was curious what the 4th was, because she said the 5th was purpose, and being able to find what's your purpose for getting sober, what's your purpose that is beyond yourself, perhaps. And I was thinking, that might be really helpful exploration for some folks who are having a hard time getting really good traction with their sobriety, is that maybe they need to look sort of outside of that, out of the urge piece, and look bigger. And what's my purpose? Where do I want to be in 5 years? And how do I get there as a sober person? And so that kind of really kind of tickled my brain of, I want to start bringing that kind of conversation in, especially for the folks who struggle a bit, maybe.
Especially with those, that have experienced profound trauma, finding that sense of meaning and purpose and value and, vision for yourself. Who am I? Who do I want to be? That can get shattered. So that struck me too. That was a really good point.
Yeah.
I think another conversation would be about shame. So we as a collective community of therapists in general, I think, throw that word around a lot. That's shame. They're in their shame. But it's a complicated dynamic. And I would love to talk more about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm looking forward to us having more interviewees and more guests and more conversations. And I so enjoy being with you guys. So I know it's going to be a good time, as well as some good conversation and resources and information for the public.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it should be fun. We're finding our groove, and we'll see where this takes us, in the coming episodes. Stay tuned for excitement. So glad that you joined us today. So please rate us or like us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, wherever you're listening to us, so that other people can find us, and we can keep sharing the message of what we're talking about here with other people, and they can join our conversation.